The reason why I wanted to talk about travel was we've described this to many people over the years when they go, well, what do you do? And we say, oh, we work in banking, insurance, and we work in travel. And it always raises eyebrows because people go, oh, it's quite far away from the world of banking and insurance. And then we describe what we do, and people always find it interesting, but I really want to just add a little bit more around it and describe in a bit more detail what it is, because, again, it's one of those things where we see, after we do explain to people, often people are able to see applicability in their industries as well, in terms of a problem that could need solving. So just sort of to make clear, the specific area I'm focusing on today, to sort of wrap it up in a nutshell, is we call it airline revenue optimization or contract revenue optimization. So imagine, I'm guessing, I'm going to hope that everyone here in this room has been on a holiday at some point. But you go to the travel agent and you want to book a ticket. So you tell them, I want to go to London. Depending on where you're sitting when you're talking to the travel agent, you might see this screen that looks like an old DOS screen. That's actually, so they're going in, they do their thing, they book you, they give you a ticket, or you get your ticket, and you go on your holiday, and you sort of, that's the end of it for you. However, it doesn't really stop there for the people who are supplying you with those tickets. A little bit later in that year, they earn commissions from the airlines. So a big part of their business model is in these commissions that they earn from the airlines for booking tickets on their planes. And one of the really common models of commissions is based on revenue growth. So I'm Qantas and you're a travel agent. Last year you did $100 million and this year you did $110 million. So you've grown 10%, and because of that we're going to reward you and give you a bonus. That's a little bit hard to see, but what you end up with is, as a travel agent, is a table that looks a little bit like, and again, I'm conscious the numbers are a bit hard to see, but a series of growth percentages. And depending on which percentage you hit, you get a certain commission. Okay, so fairly straightforward. So these are known as back-end overrides, and that's just explaining or describing what I just talked about recently. So the 107 million. So because you've grown 7 million, you fall into that first tier at the top, which pays a 2% commission, and therefore you make $2 million. So this stuff is really, really important. So for just about every travel agent, from the small mom and pop shop all the way up to your flight centers, they really rely on the revenue that's generated from this. But it's really, really hard to track. So every ticket that's booked around the world, that information is, for lack of a better term, held by an organization called IATA. And that logo may be familiar, or you might be getting a sense of deja vu when you see it, because it appears on a lot of travel brochures, it appears on e-tickets, etc. So they're global in nature, and for simplicity, let's just think of them as the global keeper of all the information around ticket data. So what agents have access to is this information that you see up there, known as hot files. And they're very archaic in nature. And although it's incredibly hard to interpret, what that information up there represents is actually a ticket. And somewhere in there is things like the name of the person who flew, the amount of the cost of the ticket, what city they took off from, where they landed, which airlines flew them for each leg of the journey. So you would need to be able to take that information and extract those pieces out in order to understand how much you've actually done in terms of sales. So it's really, really difficult. And it's slightly more complicated as well. So if you think of that trip to London that I was talking about, that's got two segments, from Sydney to Hong Kong and then to London. And imagine that, and I'm sure everyone's been on this sort of trip before, where you buy a ticket from Qantas and you turn up to the airport and it's a different airline flying you. So you go to Hong Kong with Qantas, and then you get on a British Airways plane and fly to London. So what's actually happening is you bought your ticket from Qantas, but and again, I'm probably simplifying here for the travel agent people in the room, but Qantas actually need to share that money with British Airways because it's a British Airways plane that's flying you there. So it's only fair that when it comes to paying out commissions, Qantas would only pay you on the part that they flew. But that ticket information I showed you earlier only shows the value of the total ticket. So they've got one number, so say $2,000, but they have no idea how much of that should be allocated to the Qantas flight and how much of it should be allocated to the British Airways flight. So the options that are available for agencies is, first of all, they can wait for the airlines to tell them what their numbers actually are, and that presents two problems. The main problem is just the delay. So the airlines can take months in order to tell them. And if you're running a business and you rely on those commissions, knowing that information is naturally vital. The other option, I'll skip over the second one, is to use Solvexia. So we're not biased. And in short, what we do is we take those files, those hot files, and we've actually built a step type in the system that converts them into flat file format. We process that information. We break the revenue down to the individual segments. So we'll take that $2,000 and we'll actually allocate it out. Just as a sort of a side note, when we first put the process together a few years ago, the information in terms of actually how airlines break that revenue up, it's quite secretive. So if you go to Qantas, they won't actually tell you how they break the revenue up. But common sense would tell you that if Qantas fly to Singapore and then British Airways fly to London, distance is probably going to be a factor because at the end of the day, they're businesses and they're paying for fuel. So what we actually did to circumvent that system of ambiguity is we basically have a list of all the longitudes and latitudes of airlines around the world. And if we think of the world as a sphere, even though it's not a perfect sphere, we actually calculate the distance between each airport. And then we use that to break the revenue down, which works pretty well. And what we're essentially producing and working with is your basic sort of where are we today, so like a historical representation of, in this case for a particular airline, we're at 337 million versus 262 million last year. Again, it's a bit hard to see on the whiteboard, on the board, but it's also where are we tomorrow, and this is where we start to get far more into the forecasting space. So the great thing about the travel industry is it's very seasonal in nature, so it helps with the predictive nature. So being able to, and what you're seeing here, apart from that number at the top left being a forecast for, say, an end of a year, on the bottom left is also a forecast, and where the lines diverge is where the forecast starts. And then the chart to the right is also what we're forecasting as a cumulative forecast for the year, and the horizontal lines represent, in this case, the different targets that they're trying to reach. And then what a travel agency is then able to do once we have that forecast information, wow, that's really hard to see, is, so in the first box, what you've got are two airlines. You've got Virgin and Qantas. The second box beside them is the amount that's been forecast in terms of revenue. The third represents the different revenue tiers that can be captured. So what this is telling us is for Virgin at the top, we've actually hit a tier, so we've got a 15% growth tier, whereas for Qantas we haven't captured any tiers. Then there's a list of, to the right is the revenue that's needed in each tier, followed by how much is actually earned from each tier. And although it's a bit hard to see, the opportunity that an agent can see here is that if they were to lower their revenue that they're forecast for, say, Virgin, and instead sell Qantas tickets in its place, they could actually hit a tier for Qantas and earn commissions. So it offers people with an ability to potentially optimise their business. So then what someone would be able to do is go in and say, well, for Virgin, we want to decrease the revenue that we're forecasting by 27 million. We want to increase Qantas by 27 million, and then view the net impact of it. And what that's done is it's dropped how much money they'll earn from Virgin. It's increased how much money they're going to earn from Qantas. And then the net impact over to the right is they've lost $4 million on Virgin, but they've made $12 million on Qantas. So overall, they make $8 million. So, so yeah, I guess what I wanted to do here was, like I said, give you a bit more flesh around what it is that we do in the travel industry. I think it's also to connect it back to what Mark was talking about at the beginning, where in the evolution of Solvexia, we started off as purely looking at the historical element and some of the more simplified processing. And where we've gone over time is to start working far more on the forecasting and the predictive side. And one of our goals really for 2016 is to do a lot more. So particularly Roman and Noel, who's not here today, have been doing quite a lot in that space. And I think we've made some really good strides. And I think to also connect it back to what Mark was saying at the beginning, where he said, we need your help. What we need are problems to solve. So we're like a bunch of kids, for lack of a better term sometimes, with really good ideas, and we've got lots of really smart people. But what we need are people to come to us with problems that we can actually solve. Okay, so with that, thank you. I'll hand that over to Paul.